Hello and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rassool, and today we are speaking about women, leadership, confidence, and executive coaching. Now, I read an article recently by Shireen Motara, who is an executive coach, and she wrote that there is a false perception that when women enter leadership positions, they no longer need help with development and growth, and that this is not true. There are unique challenges that present itself to women when they enter leadership positions, and some of them are lack of confidence, lack of boundaries, and how do we do adequate self-care when we are managing and leading many things and many people. After the break, Shireen and I are going to sit down and discuss that. But before this, we're going to have a look at a short video by and with Shireen where she speaks about leadership as well as finding her voice and visibility. Let's have a look.
I was 7 years old when I realized I was different, an alien. We had a lice outbreak at our school, and my mother decided to shave all my hair off as a way of managing the lice or getting rid of it. But what didn't happen for others who were with me in the school is that they didn't have to cut their hair off. These were girls with long, straight hair who were able to continue to deal with the lice without needing to shave their heads. Over the years in my primary and high schooling, I had many of those alien experiences. I grew up in a community that we would ordinarily call an Indian community, and clearly I don't look Indian. So that was part of how I grew up. Growing up in that kind of community during my high school and primary school years, I had many instances of feeling like an alien. But I did find my voice. I found my voice by excelling academically and excelling in sport, and in that way having some recognition of being valued, of being important enough to be part of that community. Over the years, I've had many experiences of finding my voice. I don't think it's a once-off thing. I think it happens throughout our lives. For me, there have been a few key events that have shaped that. The first is my decision to go to university. I decided to go to a university where I felt welcomed, where people looked like me and thought like me. And that was such a significant experience for me in shaping who I am and how I saw the world, especially in terms of social justice and feminism. During my years at university, I also joined a women's group and got a great feminist education, which helped me to shape my understanding of what exactly is wrong with the world and why are women treated that way. I always knew there was a problem, but I could never explain why. And being part of Kopanang was an amazing opportunity to find my voice as a feminist and to find my voice as a women's rights activist. And that has stayed with me for the rest of my life and continues to be a critical part of who I am and how I show up in the world. Another key aspect has been in terms of where I work and what kind of work I want to do. I lasted all of 10 months in the private sector because the work didn't resonate with me at all. I couldn't work in such a detached way where money was the only objective. But I was able to find my voice in the women's rights sector, in the nonprofit sector. And until today, I continue to be active in that sector from a volunteering perspective, but also as a consultant and as a coach. I do believe that we do find our voice in various ways, depending on the opportunities and the challenges that we are faced with. I think we need to be thinking about, why is it important that we do have a voice? For me, having a voice means I can stand up and speak out against injustice, social injustice, injustice against women, the oppression of women. And I can also speak out and support the advancement of women's rights, the building of our communities, and challenge a system that continues to perpetuate inequality. So for me, what is important when you think about finding your voice is what are the things that you are passionate about? What life experience has made you think about or want to address an issue? And that helps in finding your voice. For me, my motto is lead with courage, anywhere, everywhere. And finding your voice helps you to do that.
That was a short video by Shireen Motara done for the organization Quote This Woman on finding her voice and visibility. We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we are speaking about women, leadership, confidence, executive coaching. And joining me in studio is Shireen Motara, who is an executive coach and the founder of Tata Transform. Shireen, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Lenina. I'm happy to be here.
So, Shireen, you are an executive coach and you help women leaders. And so I wanted to start just with a description of what is executive coaching and how do we contextualize women leaders?
Yeah, so for me, I focus on women leaders and I define leadership as women in senior or executive management, but also women who lead their own businesses. And for me, I say that because I have found that my expertise works best with women at that level based on my own experience. So the executive coaching is really executive coaching because it's aimed at those levels. And so the coaching approach is a bit different. What you discuss is a bit different. Understanding that these women often are already technically competent. You know, they can do the job. They've moved up in the ranks, but now they're facing different challenges and opportunities at their level that they are now.
I mean, that's great. Thank you. Which really takes me into my next question. So, I had been reading a piece that you wrote, and you said there is a false perception that once women reach executive levels, they are done with development and learning. And so that was really interesting. And I think I'm just linking it to you saying, fine, they're technically competent, they have the skills to do this specific task and job, but development and growth, assistance with development and growth is still necessary. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so for the work that I do, what I find with women leaders and women at that level is that they are often, you know, as much as they are technically competent, they've risen up the ranks and so on, they still struggle with things like self-confidence. They still struggle with boundaries. They still struggle with taking care of themselves and prioritizing their own health and well-being. And they also may struggle with dealing with difficult relationships and conflict. And so the approach that I use is very much focused on what I call inner work. So it's very much about working with this person to understand themselves deeply, to understand their triggers, to understand their blind spots, to understand their habitual patterns that keep getting them into these difficult situations. And in doing that, you know, it becomes easier to then understand and work with others.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to ask, though, whether you can give us some practical examples of, I think, what you called, I like that you said patterns that keep getting us into difficult situations. And so, you know, there's a large narrative now around self-care and even boundaries and growth and development. But what does this look like sort of at executive or leadership or entrepreneurial level? Like how do these problems manifest where women can get to a point and say, I'm a bit overwhelmed, I'm not dealing with this properly, there's a pattern.
Okay, let me give you two examples in different contexts. The first is I was coaching a woman entrepreneur who started her own psychology practice, a brick and mortar institution, and she had a couple of staff members. She is a psychologist, but she's also the owner of the business. And so she was still caught in the trap of feeling she has to do everything. So she must do the therapy and then manage the staff and then recruit staff and then manage the business and then try to get new business and so on, and not lean into the capacity that she has in her team. So leveraging the other consultants or the other psychologists to do more of the therapy work, supporting the administrative person to be able to take on more, giving her the skills and the tools to be able to almost run the practice, and then her focusing on the key things around, getting more business, being visible, and growing the business. So that's one example. The other example is, for example, last year I coached a CEO of a fairly large organization, and our conversations were often about how to navigate relationships, relationships with the board, relationships with staff. And in that context, some of the challenges she faced was around always being available to staff. So they would phone her or WhatsApp her at 10 o'clock at night, and she'll respond, she'll pick up the phone and so on. And so as a result of that, she started feeling exhausted, tired, because she's always switched on. She's always having to respond and be available. And we had to talk a little bit about why that happened. So often these habitual patterns come from, for example, childhood, where certain things happened in our lives that shapes the way we think about our lives and how we show up. And so with her, it was really about understanding it doesn't make you a weak leader if you have boundaries. In fact, you'll be respected. And also you can send a message to your team that time out is important, that you should not be working at that time of the night, that you should not be sitting on your laptop at that time of the night. So those are the kinds of conversations we had. So you see that it's often about self-management, self-awareness and self-management, and it's also about relationship management and boundaries.
So I'm thinking that this constant availability and I think, feeling like you have to do everything yourself is so resonates with hyper independence. Is going to resonate a lot with a lot of women out there. It's a common problem. I mean, across all spheres, not even just at the executive level, but you will find it sort of even as staff members, even in the home, if you are the mother. And I think I wanted to ask, you said that, when we think about why that happened, certain things from our childhood shapes our lives. But is this a gendered thing also? That women overextend themselves? Do you find that there is a thread related to gender that makes us overextend ourselves? That there's a reason why women have such weak boundaries in place.
Of course, there's a link with our childhood, and it's also a link with our society and the way we are brought up as children. So, I think many of us can tell the stories of how we were treated as girls versus how boys were treated in our homes, what our expectations were of us versus boys, the fact that we were always often the ones doing the chores, having to do this, that, and the other, to come home from school and cook, to come home from school and clean, and so on. So I think there's definitely a gendered nature to this, and I think it's in the way society has shaped the role of women and girls. It's in the way that continues to be seen, and in the way that we continue to expect that. So also what happens in the workplace with that kind of thing is that when women get into roles, they often want to prove themselves, so they take on more than they should, because they feel, oh, I'm at a disadvantage here. I have to now prove myself. And sometimes that is our own mental blocks, right? But often it's systemic. So it could be the culture of the organization, the way in which the organization works, and the expectations, the management style, and so on. So for me, when I do this work, I try to understand the full context, but I also try to understand how this person is trying to do the best they can with what they know, and we work from that basis. So the foundation for the work I do is about self-compassion. And that even if I know I'm always hard on myself, even if I know I'm struggling to keep boundaries and so on, I must be gentle with myself about that, because I'm just going to be another person, sitting on my head telling me what I should do and shouldn't do. And so being self-compassionate also then means being open and being able to observe ourselves in those situations from a distance, and then decide, okay, I can deal with this now, or I can't deal with this now. I'm willing to accept that this is what is happening in this moment, that I can't resolve it, and that I will deal with it at another time. What we also find often with women leaders is that because of this lack of self-compassion, they are, they also then have a challenge sometimes of having lack of compassion for others. And so often there's a stereotype that women are very compassionate and so on. But when women are forced to be driven professionally, are forced to show up, are forced to, act and so on, then sometimes that can create behaviors that seem like they are shutting out others, or seem like they are putting too much pressure on others. But that's also often because of the pressure they feel and internalize, and then believe, okay, this is what works, and therefore I have to be showing up in this way.
That's a can of worms there, hey? Because when we talk about, I have to say a lot of times, and I think especially over the last year, the topic has come up of, toxic female leadership. If I may frame it that way, that's often how it's framed, the toxic behaviors from female leaders. But that's going to have to be another show. I'm glad you brought it up, though, because it gives us some context. And, I've had toxic bosses before, and many, many, many years later, did I start to think about it? Well, what pressure was she under, and what was her version of a boss, and what a boss should be like, and maybe what she was doing was just mimicking sort of the things that she knows. And so I'm just gonna leave that there. I wanted to ask you also, you said without self-compassion, we would be just another person sitting on sort of our own head, saying what I shouldn't do. And I thought that was so interesting. I wanted to come in and ask, well, when we're speaking about the need to prove ourselves, when we're speaking about these expectations, in your coaching, what do you find, what are women afraid of? So it's scary to assert boundaries if you've always been available, or there's an expectation that you should always be available. Do they speak about specifically, if I set these boundaries, I'm afraid this and this and this will happen?
Yes. So the only way in which you will see transformation is if you are interrogating why something is happening, right? And in order to change, you have to understand what's the reasoning behind this behavior that I keep doing. So in our conversations, there's always something about digging deeper as to, so if you think about, okay, you do this. So if you think about the first time that happened to you, when was that? What happened there? Who was involved? And then that starts giving them a sense of, okay, this happened to me, for example, as a child. If I say my own example, a lot of pressure from my father to perform well at school. So if you come first, if you come second, you're not good enough. So why didn't you come first? And that's the message I grew up with. And I became a perfectionist, I became a pleaser, I became a person that works extremely hard because I always have to please my authority figure. So it takes a lot for you to go back to that scenario and understand where it comes from, and then to be able to work with that and be able to then understand that I can let go of this. This person no longer has a hold on me. I can decide how I want to deal with situations of this nature going forward. And then what I do is I ask them to self-observe. So in scenarios where they have that, where something happens and they're faced with the same situation, instead of responding, is to notice what's happening in that moment, and then to either say, okay, I need time to respond, or to respond in a different way, which is not reactionary to what they are seeing, but rather in a way that possibly can transform the way that engagement is happening, because you are coming from a different place. What I always say to my clients is, there is a line drawn in a relationship. There is just so much I can ask of you and you can ask of me, but you are an individual and so am I, and I cannot change you. But I can change how I show up, and I can change my behavior. So I work a lot on this idea of agency, of being able to stand up, to assert yourself, and to say no when it's necessary, because that's another thing women are challenged with. You know, saying, no, I can't take this on right now. My plate is full and I still have to make sure my child is sorted, my home is sorted, and so on, right? So often I've been thinking now that the next newsletter I want to write is about boundaries, because I find that is the crux of the problem often. Because we don't say no, because we don't communicate about the fact that we are overwhelmed and we are not coping, people think, okay, no, this person is, you know, amazing. They can just do all the time, and then they just add more on your plate. And in a way, you are allowing that. So being able to understand where to draw the line and how to do it again compassionately, and understanding why it's important for you, you know, is a way in which you can then start addressing that. But it is a challenge, and it's also because we want to be liked, right? We're seeking affirmation, and therefore it becomes important for us to not say no to people. Like, I've had a client who said there are people who owe her money, and every time those people ask her for money, she gives them money, but they never give the money back, and she just keeps on giving and giving. Now, who's at fault there? If she's not going to draw the line, she's giving this person license to think it's okay to come back and ask money, even though I haven't paid you back. You know, so even little things like that, how we show up with our children, how we show up with our partners, in our families, in other situations, friendships. You know, it's important for us to understand this issue of boundaries. And the sad thing is that I'm in my 50s now, and I think that it's only now also that me, as a person, is starting to understand how important that is. So for this week, for example, I withdrew from a contract with a client because I felt my peace of mind is more important than her money. But I had a conversation with her because we have a relationship, and I said to her, our relationship is more important than the money from this work. And to save our relationship, I am stepping back. And you can find someone else to do this work, and that will then not let our relationship deteriorate. So you have to make tough, courageous decisions at times. Sometimes they don't sit well with you, but you realize that in the long term, you have made the right decision.
Shireen, I mean, that was great. I love that you brought in the fact that it's difficult to say no because we want to be liked. And, you know, it sounds almost, so when I think about it in my head, it sounds almost like pathetic, you know, but it really is such an important aspect of this. I did want to go into at what point women become so overwhelmed that they reach out for help, because I think that's also important. We say yes, and we don't notice, and then we reach this doesn't necessarily need to be breaking point, but sort of, you know, crack a little bit, cracking under the pressure, not happy, turning resentful about the things that we have to do and about the people that have asked us to do these things or expect us to do these things. And so digging into how we are also partly responsible and accountable for that and for our time is really interesting. But we have to take a quick break.
Okay.
So we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we are speaking about women, about leadership, about confidence and executive coaching. And still with me in studio is Shireen Motara, who is an executive coach and the founder of Tata Transform. And Shireen, before the break, you were speaking about lack of boundaries that lots of female leaders have, that often we don't know how to say no to things because we are, for multitude of reasons, but also because we're afraid of not being liked. And, that we are partly responsible for some of the overwhelm or for overcommitting because we are not putting boundaries in place and guarding our time. And so I've seen this over and over and over again and experienced it personally. I wanted to ask you, so sort of at what point then do women recognize that this is a pattern, a harmful pattern, and reach out for some help?
So sadly, it's often after they've either burnt out or they are totally overwhelmed, or their health has suffered, or their family relationships have suffered, or something critical has happened at work or in the business that affected their ability to function fully. And that is, for me, the problem. I think what often, again, because women also have all these responsibilities, they always paying and doing for others, and they are hesitant about investing in themselves, right? So if you say, as a leader, you should, as a matter of course, have a coach, because that is the space that is safe, where you can offload, where you can have conversations, and where you can grow. They may often say, but I can't afford it now because I have too many other things that I have to take care of. But then they get to the point where actually everything else is falling around them, so they have to just make that investment. In many cases, the organization must make that investment. So I think, if women leaders can think about getting support early on in their journey, and that's not just coaching, it could be therapy. For example, I've referred clients for therapy because the issues that they were dealing with, or the issues that are shaping the way they see the world, the way they are engaging with the world, comes from deep trauma. Then they need to do the therapy first in order to work through some of that, to feel ready to then be able to talk about things moving forward. And we often don't do that. Even just the thing about self-care, for example, we fall into the trap of what everyone says, oh, self-care is just about massages and candles and things like that. But at its core, for me, self-care is about boundaries. It's about taking care of your health. It's about going for medical checkups. It's about taking your medication. It's about managing your lifestyle. So, and often some of those things get out of hand, and then they seek support and assistance. So that is a bit of a challenge at times.
I hear you. Shireen, I want to play around with the concept quickly. You're speaking about how we need to take care of ourselves in order to function properly in our jobs and in our relationships. And there's always seemed to me to be this blurred line between ourselves and the skill. And I'm gonna, I wanted to go into sort of this topic of legitimacy. So let me start there actually. Shireen had also written in her article, women are constantly having to prove that they deserve a promotion, and they tend to focus on academic qualifications to build legitimacy and be recognized, right? So this topic, I think, of legitimacy. When I try to interrogate legitimacy, one of the things I'm coming up now is saying, well, if I am a communicator, then I am also the product. And so if I am the product, if the product were external, it would be something I would have to take care of. The way I need to take care of my car, I have to make sure it gets its service, I have to give it oil regularly, put air in the tires and all of that stuff. And so for me to step out of myself to try and justify my self-care. And so I'm not going to go into why I need a justification to look after myself. I'm just trying to find a framework. So there seems to be this blurred line between us and who we are and how people see us, and then ourselves as the asset and as the skill and as a legitimate asset, right? Because even a leadership position, it's your skills and your qualifications and all of those things that you need to be taking care of. So I wanted to really ask, to bring it into a question, is that, you know, do you find, I guess, that people blur these lines between who I am, how people see me, as opposed to these skills, the legitimacy of these skills? I mean, did I phrase that correctly? I don't know if I...
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I see is, and what the way I look at it is, that you are one whole person with different aspects of life, right? So there are different things that happen in your life, but you are the same person. The challenge often around this legitimacy question is that when women are promoted, when they advance and so on, depending on the cultures and the environment, and sadly this may even be feminist environments, they seem to feel forced to behave in a certain way, to show up in a certain way, so that they are accepted. So, for example, what I've seen in feminist circles is, if you can't talk the feminist talk and so on, you may not be so welcome in the space. Because you're not as good feminist like I am, kind of thing. And the similar thing happens in the workplace. So that legitimacy thing is also then that women then think, okay, maybe if I get another qualification, you know, I will be seen and respected like my colleague who barely has 1 degree, and so on. But I think that when I talk about legitimacy, I mean, legitimacy is being recognized and respected for what you are bringing, right? But for me, that's also about bringing your authentic self. And that is often the challenge. So we have to pretend to, you know, to be like others. We have to assimilate into the existing culture to be able to think we need to be accepted. And that then allows us not to be our authentic self. It then doesn't allow us to have our unique voice in the space and to be able to communicate assertively. So there's a lot of that I see happening, and often that is also in relation to, oh, no, I don't want to hurt people's feelings. No, I don't, you know, I feel sorry for this person. I hear a lot of that from women. And I think sometimes I have to often say, do you understand the injustice in the situation where you keep feeling sorry for someone and you are also making them think and behave in a certain way which is detrimental to themselves? You know, so think about it from the other person. Put yourself in their shoes and think about how they keep showing up and you constantly just showing sympathy but not challenging their thinking, not challenging their behavior, and getting them on a different path. So, you know, I think there's a combination of being accepted, not wanting to hurt people's feelings, but I think also we must accept that there are women who are doing that, who are standing up, who are challenging the way in which things are happening, who have a unique voice, who have influence, and so on. And what happens in those scenarios is that they get labeled as, oh, she's so macho, or oh, she wants to be like a man, and oh, she's, you know, so you get negative labels exactly for being assertive. So whichever the scenario, it's like you don't win in our society as a woman leader, because, you know, you're always being labeled, or there's a perception that you have to show up in a certain way. So for me, it's really for you to be who you are authentically, and to show up with your unique voice in whatever space it is. And if that space is not meant for you, then you need to step out. Rather than, you know, sell your soul, in a sense, to be with the devil. So that's also some of the conversation I have with clients when they talk about, oh, I'm struggling with this environment. I feel like I'm not seen, or I'm not heard. I find it difficult to make suggestions for things to change, and so on. then we have to start thinking about, okay, what are the steps that you've taken to address that? Who have you engaged with? What responses have you had? And then what's your other options? It's not for me to tell a client what to do. It's for me to engage their thinking, to ask them questions, and for them to consider, their options and decide what to do.
I love that answer. I feel like you took sort of my mishmash of blurred lines and actually sort of put it there. And what I'm hearing is that, you can have the skills and qualifications that completely make you qualified and competent to do the job that's in your job description. But you can go into the job and that's that was actually the question I wanted to follow with in terms of legitimacy. You can be completely qualified for the job and then go into a workplace culture, and regardless of your qualification or how qualified you are, if you don't look right, speak right, say the right things, assimilate properly into an existing culture there, you can still be rejected. And so it's almost like and I've seen this, where people do not assimilate into a workplace, or they speak about being in a toxic workplace. It's just, I don't know how to fit in because I've done what was asked of me. I've followed the journey. I've got the degree, the master's. I've got my work experience, my life experience. This was the path, the academic path that was mapped out for me to reach this pinnacle of CEO, executive leadership, or founder. And so when those kind of things happen and women come and they have this disparity between, I know I'm qualified to do this job, but I'm struggling here. Is it a trauma space for them? I often wonder, because when I speak to women who are experiencing trauma within the workplace, or toxicity within the workplace, or not fitting in, not being accepted, is this something to pay close attention to?
Yes, of course. And I think it's at that point where they decide to seek help. And, our conversations then go around what's happening in the environment, what is causing what is happening, and so on. But the biggest part of the conversation is, how am I showing up to this? And why is it triggering me or affecting me negatively? And am I, in some way, a contributor to the situation? So let me give you an example of that. I worked in an organization where I was headhunted for the role, and I was, I started in the organization. Of course, I felt I came in at a disadvantage because, one, I replaced someone who was had been the founder of that organization and been there for many years, and was then respected as, the person of this organization. And then I felt I have to prove myself here. So I have to work extra hard to prove myself. And in doing that, what I did was focus on the tasks. Focus on fixing the policy environment, focus on getting people productive, focus on relationships with our partners, and so on and so on. But what I neglected to do was to focus on rebuilding relationships with my new team more intensely. And as a result, what happened was, some parallel channel of power emerged, and the board got involved. And at the end of it, I had to step out of that environment. And when I went to seek assistance from a coach. And when I spoke to that coach and the work we did, I also understood how I showed up in that environment that contributed to what happened. So I'm not blaming myself, but I am understanding that situations happen and we influence in some way how situations happen. Because we feel pressure for something or the other. Like I felt the pressure to have to prove myself, so I had more of a task orientation. In an executive role, you have to have a kind of a balance between a task and a people orientation. And in fact, relationships become critically important at that level. So, so for me, it was that learning. And I think when I engage with clients and when we talk about these things, it's also about understanding how you are showing up in the situation, how you have responded, how you have reacted or not. That is allowing the situation to continue. And as I said, it starts with self. and really from a place of compassion and love, but also from a place of understanding I may have patterns and blind spots that are tripping me up, that I do consciously have to deal with.
I mean, that's so great. I'm thinking about, how valuable that is. Also, just to hear about entering a leadership position and the different types of skills that you need sort of across the board. You might be really strong as a task-orientated person and not so strong as a relational person. Everybody's different, but when you enter executive leadership, what I'm hearing, or entrepreneurship, or really just, a space where you have to lead or manage people, that you need to have lots of different skills. And I'm thinking also that executive coaching is part of having you recognize your strengths and weaknesses in these different areas and then help you to grow some of those spaces.
Exactly. So in the executive coaching space, we use personality assessment, and I work with the Enneagram because I feel it's a deep tool. It looks at the inner self rather than focusing on the outer world. And when you understand your inner self better, you understand your blind spots, your habitual patterns, and so on. We then work with that to help you not change who you are, but to strengthen, what is working well for you, and to be open and conscious.
Yes, and
to the
less
other things.
defensive, I'm sort of thinking,
Yes. So, because often when we come, like when I went to the coach, I said, these people, they did this, they did that, they did that. And then she said, and what did you do? So the coaching process really helps. It serves as a mirror in a sense, reflecting back to you some of the things that you possibly don't want to recognize, or possibly, you've gone through life so far and it's like, I've coped with it, it's fine. But at some point it will trip you up and you will have to engage yourself about it and work to resolve it.
Shireen, we've got about 2 minutes left. I want to ask you just some quick tips. So, not everyone has access to an executive coach or even a coach or this type of information, but I know there's always little things you can do that can help you grow, possibly on your own. Are there like, 2 or 3 things people can start at home just to help them, I don't know, be their own mirror or lead better?
So the one thing I would say is set your own life goals. Set goals for yourself that you want to achieve, that's related to you personally rather than everyone around you, and work towards those goals. That will help you also stay focused on yourself. And then the thing about boundaries, it's really important. And you will see that if you have boundaries, it can transform your life and your relationships. And you don't have to communicate them in a problematic way. It can be easily communicated. No, I'm not available now. I'm available at this point and this time. If you can't make that, then I'm sorry. Right? And then taking care of yourself. And remember what I said about self-care. Not necessarily just saying I'm going to have a glass of wine and a massage or whatever, but deeply taking care of yourself, taking care of your health, eating well, exercising, and then also, exercising boundaries within that.
And sleep. My new thing is like also sleep and rest, which I know is very difficult for a lot of people, and especially difficult for women who are overwhelmed and have like multiple things.
Yes.
Shireen, I just want to say thank you so much for coming onto the show and for sharing with us. I think people and women have learned a lot here today in terms of where to go with leadership. And you mentioned that you have a blog, and is there any way people can get hold of you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn because that's where I'm most visible. And then I also have a website, ShireenMotara.com. And then I'm on Instagram as well as Shireen Motara Coach.
Okay, well, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we've been having a great conversation about women in leadership and the challenges that come along with leadership positions. Now, before we go, we're going to have a look at another short video about the importance of female leaders and the importance of growing women in leadership positions. Let's have a look.
Gender equality is intrinsically linked to all our development challenges, from human rights, peace and security, to economic growth, education, and sustainability. The evidence is clear. When women are empowered, everybody benefits. Yet at current rates, it'll take 257 years to close the gender workplace equality gap. Among Fortune 500 companies, women make up a mere 7% of company CEOs and just over 20% of board directors, even as we know that diverse leadership drives growth and higher annual returns. And across the world, the global gender pay gap remains stalled at 16%, and in some countries that gap is as high as 35%. That is why the UN Global Compact worked with UN Women to develop the Women's Empowerment Principles, a framework of 7 principles to galvanize stakeholders to drive gender equality in the workplace, the marketplace, and the community. The Women's Empowerment Principles serve as a roadmap to foster business practices that empower women, including equal pay, equal opportunity for career advancement, paid parental leave, and zero tolerance for sexual harassment in the workplace. We are proud that over 3,000 CEOs have signed the Women's Empowerment Principles Statement of Support. What we see in practice, however, is that less than 30% of these companies are setting the appropriate targets needed to fully align with Sustainable Development Goal 5 on gender equality. To put the Women's Empowerment Principles into action, the UN Global Compact has recently launched Target Gender Equality, an accelerator program for companies to set and reach ambitious targets for women's leadership and representation in business. Target Gender Equality also contributes to SDG 5.5, which calls for ensuring women's full and effective participation in leadership at all levels of decision-making, including political, economic, and public life. The COVID-19 pandemic risks reversing the progress that had been made on gender equality and women's empowerment in the last decades. The UN Global Compact remains fully committed to advancing gender equality in our efforts to build back better, because equality simply cannot wait.
That was a short video on women and leadership, and that brings us to the end of our hour together. Now, if there is one thing that I'd like to pull out that Shireen said that I find is vitally important, is the need for boundaries when you are in a leadership position. I personally view boundaries as part of your self-care routine, because if you are not able to say no and you overwhelm yourself, you won't be able to do any of the 1 million things on your plate, correct? So going forward, remember, no is a full sentence. That is all we have for this evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lenina Rassool. Goodbye.